and climate transition and our economic and money system. He has worked long time in journalism, documentary and national television. So without further ado, let's welcome Mr. Gode for the session. Now I hand over the session to our resource person, Mr. Gode. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for the invitation. I had an introduction ready about myself, but you already did it for me. So thank you for that too. I would like to share my screen. Let's see if that's going to work. And let's see if I can start. Can you see this? Can you still see me?
Right now, it's not sharing.
It's
not showing up for me. I can see it. Thank you. Yes.
Okay. So
oh, you can.
Yeah.
Let's see what's happening.
Yes, it is visible.
Yes,
okay,
it is
so
visible.
you can continue.
Yes, it is. Cooperation or competition?
Yes, the rise of cooperative games and cooperation and inclusion in society.
Yes, that is the screen.
Okay, good. Can everyone see it now, or are there still people who are not seeing it? Or I'm trying to. Well, yes, who am I? You already told. So I had a multiple choice who I am, whether I'm Jaap de Goede or a serious game designer or a film news documentary professional or a social psychologist. Well, I'm all. And I made several games. Actually, I made both entertainment games and some with hidden lessons and some serious games as well. And what interests me most is money systems and energy transition and cultural transition. So what I noticed in games, originally I wanted to show you one of my games, but we thought that that might be a bit difficult because I needed at least 6 players. So there is another topic long thought about cooperation in games, and there are a lot more cooperative games lately. If you look at the last few hundred years, maybe, then game is about synonymous with competition, I think. Monopoly, Risk, football, and many people don't like games because they are competitive, and they say I don't like because I can lose, and usually most people lose and just one wins. But since about 2000, there's a real rise in commercial cooperative games. You have escape rooms, you have role-playing games. There are games, board games, which you play against the board instead of against each other. And at the same time, like these, or like Minecraft, where together you build a world, and these games are not against each other, but they are with each other to either tell a story or have an activity together, or work against a common enemy, which may be played by either a computer, maybe one other player, or sometimes a mechanism, an artificial intelligence maybe in the board or in the game mechanics itself. So games can be both competitive and cooperative. Now, if you look at society, we are cooperating more and more, and we have to cooperate more and more. Where we used to have many conflicts, we see that many international conflicts as well. We see that there are still tensions, fewer and fewer conflicts overall. One of my friends is a colonel with the military, and she did a big study about it. And she told me that over the last 40 years, conflict overall much, much less than, say, 60 years ago, or also the last couple of 100 years. It may be hard to believe because of the things happening at Gaza, for example, or tensions everywhere. The case. What we also see is there are bigger and bigger economic blocks like the EU, or I understand that India just pulled out of a possible agreement in Asia, a trade agreement, but also everywhere, South America, Africa, Asia, United States was one of the first, Europe. We are working more and more together and maybe going to one global system. And that's also because of our challenges ahead. The Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, for me, symbolize this, because we have climate change to tackle. We have global poverty, which we try to tackle. We have human rights, which we try to tackle. We have emancipation, where we want everyone to be included. So this is also, we see a same kind of trend in society as we see games, it seems. So my question was, is there a link? I'm not sure if you see this link. I don't think there is a link between the game and the COVID pandemic, which you had a couple of years ago. But I do remember that this game pandemic is really a breakthrough in cooperative games. It stems from, I think, 2008. And the mechanic is so elegant that you can play with 4 or 5 players in about an hour. I don't know if you know the game. As people who are watching, do you know the game? Can I ask that? Or would you like to listen? It's a game where you try to fight actually 4 pandemics at the same time, 4 diseases that are breaking out everywhere in the world, and they spread very quickly over the board due to the game mechanic used with cards and a few other mechanics, which are really simple. So you can play in an hour, and together as players, you try to stop all those meeples on the board, which represent virus outbreaks. You try to stop these all over the board. And if you're not in time to stop them, you lose the game together. And if you are in time to find something to vaccinate with, then you win together, all players together. So is there a link? I think it's hard to prove whether there is a link. You could say maybe it's a reflection of society, because we have to work together more. There is more room for thinking about another kind of game, which is not competitive. But there are so many new co-op games that I'm not quite sure if they're just reflection. Many of the games are fantasy games, for example. So it could also be that we're just trying to escape to another world, that we need more ways to escape from how we feel in this world, because that's also what I often hear around me with newest generations XYZ, that they find it harder and harder to relate to our capitalist democratic society. At least for most countries it is democratic, I think, now. Also there are many other countries where it's different, but there's a kind of disappointment, and many people feel not included, so they might be escaping into games. So that might also partly describe why we play cooperative games, because it's kind of a better world, maybe, in a way. We work together instead of against each other. But it could also be that we use the games to teach, and some of these games are really made to teach. This is a new break by the maker of Pandemic, not the COVID pandemic, of course, but the game Pandemic, and it's called Daybreak. I hope to have it already. It's in the mail right now from a Kickstarter. And it's a game where in a couple of hours, as players together, you try to stop climate change and to reverse it. And it's a fairly optimistic game, but it is also difficult to win because the goal is together to reverse or at least stop the climate change that's going on. But it's hopeful, and that's nice in a way because it also functions a bit like propaganda, maybe good propaganda, I think, in the last case. But games can also be used as propaganda, and they have long been used that way. This is a game from the First World War, which was used at that time to, well, let people get used to the idea of that you could be at war, and that maybe Germany could attack, and that then the other countries should do something against it. There were many games like that, preparing for war or preparing for something. You might remember maybe the game Monopoly. Monopoly seems maybe just a game which reflects society, but originally, I don't know if you know, maybe you know it, it was designed by a lady in 1903, about 30 years before Parker Brothers said it was invented. And this lady, Elizabeth McGee, made the Landlord's game. And the Landlord's game was actually meant as a kind of a propaganda game or a teaching game to teach that capitalism is maybe not such a good idea. And actually, it looked a lot like Monopoly now. It was practically the same game, but it also had a second half. The first half was kind of competitive, like Monopoly is. Monopoly is very competitive. But the second way to play it was more of a cooperative way to play it. What they did was every time you landed on a house and you had to pay, you did not just pay to the landlord, because it was really about landlords, this game, paid for the house the landlord built, for the work that was actually done by or for the landlord. You did not pay for the rise in the land price. Instead, the land price you paid into a common fund, a public treasury, you could say. And this common fund was for everyone to split every time you pass start, and you would get your share from the common fund. So the profit that was made from the rise in prices was fairly shared. So it was much more cooperative, really. Unfortunately, that message was kind of lost when the game was, well, I would say, appropriated, or maybe you could say stolen. At least it was taken out of her hands, and there were court cases because she, of course, found out once it was sold. Actually, her game was really popular in the 1910s and 1920s because many people copied it for themselves. It was kind of an open source game. She had patented it and wanted to sell it, but it did not really work out. She even offered it to Parker Brothers, who thought it was too political and too complex. Eventually, someone who saw one of her open source games really needed the money because he had an ailing child who was dying of a disease, and he needed money to bring the child to the hospital. And he put his last money and that of some friends into making this game because he could really sell it. So he kind of tinkered a bit with it and started to sell it himself. And somehow it became a hit. And then Parker Brothers bought it, and then it became history. But of course, the original message of Monopoly is kind of lost. Maybe if you play it now, you think, well, capitalism is not so funny. But that's about it. Or maybe you do think it's funny because Monopoly has really been made into making capitalism cute. If you look at Mr. Moneybags here, he really looks cute, even if he runs away with the money. kind of makes you used to the message capitalism is good. I'm not sure if that's, I can't prove that it's conscious propaganda, but it is, in a way, it works out that way. We get used to the idea of capitalism also because we play Monopoly a lot, and vice versa too. You can also do this very consciously. Lately, there are many games which help us to save energy, for example. These can be apps on your phone or on your computer, or they can be board games. The one on the left is from Radboud University, I think, where Marieke also works. And the right one is, I think that's actually an American one, but we have several projects here in the Netherlands where they use computer games to help people save energy by playing a game, by using a gamification, as you can say. So you can really consciously use games to push, and these games can look very much like entertainment games. They don't have to be serious games. But maybe there's a second possibility why we are playing more cooperative games in entertainment games too. Maybe it could be that we are exploring new ways of doing things. We are, of course, not these monkeys, but monkeys can learn to cooperate. They can also explore new ways. Actually, this picture is of research where we try to find out whether humans are prone to cooperation or prone to competition. Of course, we are both. This research was with primates, with chimps, who are fairly close to us evolutionary. And the expectation was that they probably would not cooperate so easily. On the other hand, they do cooperate in groups. So what are the reasons, or what is necessary for them to cooperate? So what they did is they made a couple of machines which could give food, but you could only get the food out if you cooperated with it at least. And where they expected that there would be little cooperation, soon there was a lot of cooperation, and they got all the food out, and there were at least 3,500 instances of trying to get the food out together. What they also found is that monkeys cooperated easier if they were of equal status. So that they did, perhaps that was because they didn't have to think who had to be first or something like that. What also happened is that if monkeys tried to steal the food while others cooperated, that was not really tolerated. So they also wanted a fair share. Of course, we need to cooperate also as humans. Otherwise, we would not get that far. We are too vulnerable as single people. So there is a need to cooperate. But of course, if there's scarcity, there's also maybe a need to compete. So there has been a lot of research in psychology and in economy since at least the 1950s. What makes people cooperate? Because certainly after the Second World War, it was very obvious that we have to cooperate to make it together. Otherwise, we just kill each other. So that's not for scarcity or whatever. So we don't want that. So what makes people cooperate? And one of the most interesting games which was played a lot is a game to research. It's the Prisoner's Dilemma game, which you probably know. For in case you don't know it, I will be very brief about it. The status is so it's played with two players who cannot communicate with each other, who are both, and they are taken in because they have committed a crime, possibly, and they can either choose to. That's why it's called Prisoner's Dilemma. They can either choose to keep their story straight and both say we didn't do it, in which case they cooperate, or either or both of them could defect and say, okay, I did do it, or I didn't do it, but the other one did. So if both keep the story straight and they cooperate, you can also make this in a together game, then they both win by getting a low sentence, a short sentence. But if one of the two says, okay, if one of the two cooperates and the other doesn't, then the one who doesn't cooperate actually wins big because he's freed, or she. And if they both don't cooperate, then they both lose. So if you have to play this game a lot after each other, then it's best to cooperate, and probably it's best to cooperate anyway. But if you only played once and you don't know the one you're playing with, then it's very likely that you say, it's probably better to compete. This was one of the games. Another game which was also researching this, because a lot of games are used in research, exploring other ways. Of course, most of these are not entertainment games, but I would like to look at them. I'm going a bit faster. I wanted to say something about the ultimatum game too. There's the ultimatum game where you can give each other money, where one of the two has to split the sum, and the other can say yes or no. And if the other says no, then both get no money. So the one who splits the money into two could evenly split it, and then probably the other will say yes, and then, but he could also try to get a bit more. And then we find in Western society, usually the one who splits says, well, I'll keep about something between 30 and 40%. And then the other one says yes. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'll give you 30 or 40%. And I'll keep the other 60. So I'll keep a bit more, but 2/3 is about the cutoff point. Because otherwise, indeed, usually people say I get too little, even if it's big numbers, like one gets 80 euros and the other gets 20. 20 may still be a lot of money, but often people then already say, well, that's not fair, then we both get nothing. This is culturally dependent, because in the Western world, we see that people try to take a bit more. But if you look at Lambarala in Indonesia, where there are whale hunting societies who really have to cooperate a lot already, something strange happens, from our point of view at least. They actually offer about 60% to the other. So they keep less. And when you look at Peru, certain communities there, they really have to work hard and compete with each other. They actually take a lot more for themselves. They take 80% for themselves and only offer about 20% on average to the others. So the culture and the way we think is, and the way we work together is, seems to be influencing how we cooperate too. So let's go to Meadows and Meadows. Now we're talking about games anyway. Donella Meadows and her husband, who I think is still alive, Dennis Meadows, I'm not quite sure, but he lived longer anyway. They were really influential in both development of serious games and in thinking about climate change, resources, and about systems thinking. So I think they're really, really important people. You probably know them. I think you must. So I can probably be brief about them. But I think they not only are very important in systems thinking and serious games and thinking about resources, I think they are also very important in starting to think about how we cooperate, because they published Limits to Growth, which was kind of followed by the Club of Rome, or kind of at the same time, saying that our resources are limited. And very quickly, they used serious games like Fish Banks, which we probably also all know, which show that we have to cooperate to solve this problem of resource scarcity. You can't just, or you have to go off, or you have to give it to one person, maybe privatize resources. But they were very quick in using the small systems of games to reflect the big systems, and looking about whether it's going to be competition or whether it's going to be cooperation. So I think they were very early in serious games. It was very early that cooperation is a thing. Dennis Meadows still is in the game, was in the game. I'm not quite sure. Marika probably knows, or I'll ask later. And he worked on the World Climate Simulation, which is connected to C-Roads, MIT C-Roads and En-ROADS, which is played over the last 10 years, I think, and which is also a way to explore new ways of dealing with things. And also, you can play it kind of competitively, or you can play it cooperatively with different stakes, and that's usually how you do it, to solve a common problem, namely not let temperature increase too much. It's a really good game, and roads, I can't imagine that for them. So games are kind of a microcosm where you can experiment with different degrees of cooperation and competition, and different ways to cooperate, and to explore when do I cooperate and learn. So serious gamers have known this for a long time, but it's still very interesting how come that entertainment games are also using this for the last 20 years. Well, maybe with so much is changing, also the internet, and we are so much more connected, maybe we are all trying to explore and learn a new mindset, kind of subconsciously, maybe. This game, by the way, is the mind mindset, and it's bordering a bit on telepathy, you could say. Well, I'm not too serious about that, but it is a very special experience to play this fast game, where you have to, without talking, have to together play your hands and play the numbers in the right order. So you don't know which number the other has, and it's a special experience because most people who really play it find that even if they don't really feel they communicate, they kind of tune into each other, and the cooperation kind of comes natural. Maybe this is also a moment to look at those different commercial entertainment games which are more cooperative, because I think most of us do know the competitive games like Risk, Monopoly, etc. Or most sports, even team sports, are still, they may be cooperative within the team, but they're always competitive in a league or in a competition. But there were also in entertainment games early starters who try to actually, again, as a form of teaching, you might say, a kind of propaganda. I would call it a good way of propaganda, like family pastimes, Canadian or North American publisher who made a lot of games where you have to do never against each other. Many small shoot games, one better than the other. but they didn't really break through until I think about pandemic, which I already talked about, and a lot of online games. And actually, online games, it's much easier to make a cooperative game like Roblox or Minecraft or that kind of thing, because you can play against the computer. You don't need a player to play against, so you cooperate against the computer. But I think that cooperative games became such a buzzword already, that a lot of the games that you can play now, which are called cooperative, actually are not. They are more like team games, where several teams must cooperate but compete with each other. And that's more, well, maybe like society on a whole, where we work together in the business where we work, and in our company, but the companies compete against each other. Escape rooms are also really strong the last 20 years, and also that's together against the escape room, together against the puzzle, and they are very much used as entertainment games, but sometimes also as educational games. Players against the board. It's become easier to make board games and to publish them. And from the moment that people discovered that you could make cooperative games, more and more of these cooperative games have been made, where the game itself has a kind of card, or usually a kind of card mechanism with a deck, which forces certain events and works like a kind of time bomb or a clock. And there are a lot of those games where together you play against the board. So you win together or you lose together. There are, of course, also games where you play together to do tasks. And you have also television games, for example. It's also very much an entertainment game, like Wie is de Mol, we say in the Netherlands. It's called the Mole of Who is the Mole in the franchises abroad. This is from the Netflix version, I think. And their players cooperate, but they know there is one traitor in their midst. So it's kind of competing against the traitor, or trying to root out the traitor, and at the same time cooperating and trying to make it anyway, despite that there is a traitor. It's kind of a variation on cooperation, but it's interesting to explore what happens, the tension between the competition and cooperation becomes more evident. A lot of couples never wanted to play games because always one of the couple loses, and then you don't want to sleep together anymore. But now there are more and more games where you can play as a couple together, and you win together or you lose together. These can be computer games like this one, Fire Boy and Water Girl, where together you must solve puzzles with all kinds of levers, where one has to use a lever so that the door opens for the other one, and so on, so that you can finish level after level, but only by cooperating. It's more fun to do together because you never have, you always lose together and you always win together. A lot of the cooperative games are also communication games. I think Dixit is not really a cooperative game, but the fun of the game is more in because there is a winner, the one who scores most points. But it is more about communicating, and charades, of course, is also such a game. So it's exploring different communication styles and exploring ways to understand each other in another way than you normally do. You start to listen more to each other. You start to try and understand each other more. So it's kind of a playful, sneaky way to teach people to listen more attentively to each other and to try to understand each other more. I think that's not necessarily why the game was made, but it is why people like playing it, because they feel they connect more through these style of games. I'm approaching my last slides, I think. There's one issue I did not know quite how to place, but I was already saying you have cooperative games on the one hand and competitive games on the other hand, but often it is also a mix, and it's not only in team games, but it's also sometimes it can switch. And we're talking about the traitor games where you cooperate until the traitor kind of spoils the whole thing. And this is kind of a variant. It could also be a competition game where you suddenly have to cooperate, which there are also games that do that. But this game is really interesting, I think. It's called Diplomacy. You might have heard of it because it was the favorite game of John F. Kennedy, of Kissinger, and quite a few other politicians. It's a really nasty game, actually. It uses simultaneous movement, and it's about the 20 years running up to the First World War, where there are tensions between the European nations. And you are all playing one of the nations, one of the countries, like England, Germany, Russia, the Turkish Empire, France, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. And you all have armies and fleets, but you cannot win on your own. So to win, you always have to cooperate with one of the other players at least, or maybe is that they support your attacks so that you can expand your territory. And the aim of the game is to expand your territory so far that you own half of the board. I find this game very interesting because it teaches you about diplomacy, and it teaches you about treason. It also teaches you about that some games can be so rough that you really lose your friends over it. I almost did, personally. And it also teaches you about how far am I prepared to go to suddenly compete instead of cooperating, and go against the common good? Or do I find the common good more important? So I think it can also be a very good teaching tools. It is also used at several studies here in the Netherlands still to actually think about exactly that, diplomacy studies. Not just because the game is diplomacy, but in studies about diplomacy and international relations. What I also found interesting about the game, it always moves to a state where you have two big blocks. And you could see that as a way that people are knocked out, but you could also see that as a way that nations have to work together to win. So I think it's an interesting game, again, to think about cooperation or competition. Another last thought, I think, is cooperation, competition is capitalism is also, I think, a way to turn competition into cooperation. Because Adam Smith already said, if we all work selfishly within this system, it will all turn out well. Well, I think it didn't, but there is a point. At least it was a way to try and combine cooperation and competition. And then the almost last slide. Cooperative storytelling is actually a very big share of cooperative gaming. It moves away from the competitiveness aspect of gaming and moves playing and sharing a story or a new reality together. And it can be purely for entertainment, but even in the entertainment games, I have played a lot of role-playing games. I experimented with quite a few. Even if it seems to be only for entertainment, there is a lot you can learn about cooperating, about listening to each other, about forms where how far can I be selfish or not selfish. And because it is a game, of course, you can very much experiment and learn together without messing up the reality we live in. It's a playground, a sandbox, like most games are. So I think also entertainment games can be, like serious games, a teaching tool for us, even if it's more subconscious. So from that point, if they can be like that, these games, these entertainment games, if they can be a teaching tool or a subconscious teaching tool or a conscious teaching tool, then maybe we as serious game makers or people who should take and grab that chance and use these games to push forward to that what we need. And I think that a lot is in the cooperation, and to think about, okay, how can we consciously steer toward this cooperation? So I would plea to even more follow and maybe push this trend of cooperative games to teach, to explore, and together to learn and find out. So that's what I would like to propose. Thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, I'm open to them.
Thank you so much, sir, for the insightful session and very interesting session. Now, I would like to invite everyone and request them to please ask the questions. One of the question is already in the question and answer tab. Question is that the cooperative games emergent seems to have the common nominator, the cooperative actions toward stopping something. How successful have we been in reality when it comes to stopping events, and what higher order solutions might work better?
I think it's a very interesting question. Yes, I think it is true. Most of these games are stopping something from stopping a monster from breaking through, stopping climate change, preventing a war, all that kind of thing, stopping a disease from spreading. I am not quite sure how successful they really are. Of course, I think we have been successful in a very big crisis, in the COVID crisis, in slowing down the spreading of the disease together by cooperating very strongly internationally until a vaccine was ready. Of course, you can still discuss about it, but I think for me it looked a lot like pandemic, like the game we were playing, where also you on the board try to stop it from spreading until somebody has enough cards to find the cure. So I think it's not unrealistic, but I do think the big issues we have to tackle, I surely hope that we can tackle them. So at least the least the games can do is give us kind of a hopeful message that we can do it and give us the energy we need to try. I'm not sure if we can look at them as a predictive tool. Not really in that way. Maybe some other games could be used as a predictive tool, but these are more serious simulation games, which you could also make into entertainment games, by the way. Is that to your question?
Okay, thank you, sir. So another question from Mary K. Another question is that how come you think that designing an online cooperative game should be easier than a haptic cooperative games?
I'm
Or
not
maybe
sure
I
if
misunderstood.
I'm not quite sure. Which kinds of games should be easier to?
I mean, I understood that you said at the start of your presentation and the first sheets that
Mhm.
designing an online simulation game that is cooperative is easier than where the players play against the machine, against the online simulation, is
Mhm.
easier to design than a haptic one. I do not have a
Oh,
good answer to that question myself, so I was curious about your
oh,
answer.
okay. I'm not sure what you mean at this moment with a haptic game, but I meant that I think you mean analog games with that.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. Well, if you have a computer game, you can certainly now artificial intelligence is so rapidly becoming better. You can use the computer as an opponent, which means you don't have to have a human opponent anymore, which means you can take the human out of the competitive position, which means you
We
can,
did that. We conducted recent experiments in the SIG sustainability with Wiele that asked you
Mhm.
that question earlier, and we played against the computer partly, but sort of the humans took over.
Yeah,
But we also did not use it to the full capacity.
yeah, that's I think that is true because usually human opponent is still can be much more interesting. But usually, if you look at the board games, for example, which pandemic, which is really smart in the way it works, it also uses a kind of an algorithm which you play against. Or if you look at an escape game, it's a number of puzzles which you try to solve together, which you play against. Of course, those puzzles are usually made by humans. But it takes away the competition element for the group which you are in. And I think a computer gives us much more opportunities to make an opponent which is not the human, and that you have to think
But
harder
could we then
to do it another
make
way.
the division? Yeah, could we then make the division between a rule-based game? So the opponent is based on rules, responsive based on predetermined rules. But in AI, we can shift those predetermined rules during the gameplay, depending on how the players respond. So that even that continuum could even be nonsense in future.
I think it's a very interesting question. I really have to think about it. Yeah, it could be. I think it could be. It's very interesting, but it's kind of mind-boggling to think about that continuum between gamification and really open simulation games could shift because of introducing an artificial intelligence element. It's really weird. I like the idea, Monica. Yeah. But
Let's see
I don't
what the
have an answer to
future
it.
brings.
Yeah.
So now I invite Mr. Jawahar Bhalla to ask his question.
Thank you, Rupali, and thanks. Yeah, that was a really interesting presentation. Got me thinking all the way through. So I was observing as you were talking, right? You talked about how the monkeys did not tolerate stealing of food. I thought that was quite interesting. The Indonesian tradition of sharing 60 more than you actually give more than you take. Yeah, that's fascinating. And in cultural aspects, I know in Hawaii, for example, they used to have the fishers would share with the farmers, and everyone would sort of share their food. And in fact, the concept of aloha is so different to the world today, where we have give and take. It was about giving and receiving, right? There was a different paradigm. It was not about giving and taking, but giving and receiving at the same
it is.
time. Yeah. And even Dana Meadows and Dennis Meadows, the limits to growth, their whole premise was this cooperation is fundamental. You know, we're not the sum of our parts, but the product of their interactions. And then you mentioned the COVID game, you know, but in the COVID game, you know, we focused on one particular interaction, for example, transmission over all else, and we had lockdowns, you know, so was that a good thing, you know, that type of thing. But what I was really curious about, and you touched on this, you know, you played the diplomacy game and you said you almost lost your friend, right? Where does this transition happen, right? What is it that causes a transition from cooperation to competition? Is that something from a system? And I was just thinking, maybe from a systems perspective, is that somewhere about where we draw the boundary from where there is a reward and there's a fear aspect to it? But I was really curious about how you see that boundary being drawn that separates going or transition from competition, from cooperation to competition.
Well, it's again a very interesting, very interesting, very good question, I think. I think that if I look at diplomacy in this case, it's actually two systems working against each other. You have the cooperative aspect, which is really a tactical aspect almost, because otherwise you cannot win the game. So you could also almost say it's kind of a fake thing, but it isn't really, because you really need the others to reach your goal. But it's built into the system, into the game itself. The system against it is the resources are limited, and you have to own. You have to, if you want to win the game, you have to own half the board. So that means that somewhere you have to cooperate in such a way that you betray others. So I'm not quite sure if it's two systems working against each other, but it's certainly a built-in loyalty conflict. So the system invites you to act this way. So thinking out loud, I think you cannot only have systems which invite to cooperation or systems which invite to competition, but maybe also systems which invite to treason. And I think this is one.
Yeah. No, thanks, Sepp. That's very insightful. More thinking to be done. Thank you.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you too for bringing this one up, because I think there's a lot of research to be done about this. Which makes me think I forgot to tell about one thing, because it is often said, is a human good or is he bad? We've been thinking about it at least since the Bible, but I think much longer. And of course, one of the answers is we're both. But then why are some people more altruistic than others? And there's a lot of research in the last 10 years, I think, about that. There are a couple of really good TED Talks about it too. And one of the reasons, I think, is mirror neurons, which we have. We have special neurons in our brain, which react to what we see. So if we see someone else in pain, those neurons react, and we also feel the pain a little. If someone moves, those neurons react as if we move too. So that is not only very handy in learning from others, because you are kind of a copy machine in that way, but it's also a basis for empathy, I think. And we don't know exactly how it works, but we also have this these small bits in our brains, and they're called the amygdala. And the amygdala reacts to pain of others, it seems. If you look at psychopaths, they have a very small amygdala. If you look at people who donate their kidney, they have a relatively big amygdala. So maybe a physical component to it as well. But one thing I wanted to state is that we are actually kind of wired to also empathize and cooperate. We are also wired to cooperate. I'm not sure if that kind of, I found it insightful. Any more questions?
Thank you, sir. One more question is there. How about creating cooperative games in which the purpose is to make opponents your friends, eliminate competition, and foster cooperation?
How about in which purpose is to make opponents your friends? Yeah, I like it. Yeah, I like it. I'm trying to think if I already know games like that. There's one in a way which already goes a bit in that direction, which is also relative to Paco Saco, Peace Chess. I haven't played it myself, but I heard a couple of people who were really enthusiastic about it a couple of weeks ago. And it's a way of playing chess where you never take a piece from the board. Instead of they are hugged, they aren't really captured, but they are hugged and they are dragged along on the board on the same square where they were where they would otherwise have been captured. So you get chains of whole of pieces who are together, and you get more and more entangled with your two groups. And the designers thought of it as a peace game, as more as a way to cooperate together and to entangle together and to think about meeting each other and befriending. But I'm not quite sure if it's a cooperative game, because there is still the winning move, because the one who finally hugs the king with the chain of pieces is the winner. So I'm not sure if this is a game which is already in, going towards this goal, but I think it's a very interesting, yeah, would be a very interesting kind of game to design. Yeah, I would like that, to design games where you make friends instead of compete. Yeah, I like that. Let's do so.
Okay. So thank you so much, sir. As we approach the conclusion of our webinar, I would like to extend our gratitude to Mr. Gaude for his valuable insights. Now let's invite Dr. Jigyasu Dubey, the coordinator of Center of Excellence in Simulation and Gaming at Sri Vaishnav Vidyapith Vishwavidyalaya, for the words of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Rupali. Before starting my thanks, I would like to take this opportunity to announce an important event organized by our university to this is about Arohanam, 1 week faculty development program on simulation games and simulation in teaching. Our university is organizing in association with AIU SSSAADC from 1st February to 6th February 2024. And so I request all of you to join this. These are the contact person for this FDP. You can contact them, Dr. Rupali Bhartiya and Dr. Gaurav Srivastav. And we will send you all this information for registration on your email IDs. So this is about Arohanam, 1 week faculty development program, and the resource person for this 1 week faculty development program will be Dr. Elizabeth Leak, Dr. Vinod Damlekar ji, and Dr. Upinder Dhar. So we also finalize the agenda for this. Hope this will be a great faculty development program. So coming to my point, we are thankful. So at the outset, express our sincere gratitude to Mr. Jab for accepting our invitation to conduct the session. We also thankful to the International Simulation and Gaming Association ISAGA for the collaboration and support in the organization of Pratiti 2023. And we also express our gratitude to Dr. Upinder Dhar, Honorable Vice Chancellor, and Dr. Santosh Dhar for their continuous guidance. Our sincere thanks to the today's panelists, Dr. Elena Jawar Ballaji, Mary K, Dr. Vinod Damlekar ji, Dr. Ramesh Sharma ji, and all other panelists who are present, and all the participants who make this webinar successful. My special thanks to Marike for helping us in finding speakers, and also Vinodji for suggesting speakers time to time. It was Vinodji's idea to start the webinar series. We are thankful to him, and also thankful to Dr. Rupali Bharti and all the members of the COESG and IT team of the university for their kind support. The important message of today's webinar is use games to teach, explore, and learn. Thank you to all of you, and thank you to Dr. Gode once again.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you to our distinguished speaker and to all of you for joining us today. We hope you found this session enriching and inspiring. I request all the participants to please fill the feedback form for getting e-certificates, and stay tuned for more exciting webinars on gaming and simulation in the Pratiti 2023. So have a great day. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Good day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. We are closing now.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Sir.